Hello, everybody. Can you hear us in the headsets? Yeah, good thumbs up. All right, welcome. So, I hope you've all had a wonderful Ignite so far. We've been having some great conversations here with the VS Code team and all of you folks telling us what you like. And it's been absolutely brilliant to speak to you all. So massive welcome and thank you for joining our session. So, my name is Hampton. I'm a cloud advocate based on the Developer Tools Advocacy team, which is tightly coupled with the Visual Studio Code team. And I'm joined here today with 𝗦𝗲𝗲𝗏.
Hello. Hi, how are you? My name is 𝗦𝗲𝗏𝗏𝗏. Really excited to be here and be talking about Visual Studio Code.
Absolutely. So it's going to be a brilliant session today. And what are we talking about? Well, we're going to be talking to you a little bit about Visual Studio Code and how that helps you as an IT pro. So the title of the talk today, Visual Studio Code for IT pros who like to sleep. So just a run through the agenda, what are we going to be touching on? So first we're going to be touching on managing VS Code at scale. Now, we know that it has been maybe not so obvious to everybody as how you can use Visual Studio Code in the enterprise environment. So we're going to pull that apart a little bit today and show you how we are making it even more better or a little bit better for you so you can use Visual Studio Code at scale inside your organizations. We're also going to be touching on balancing security and flexibility. So we know that MCP has been this big sort of topic of interest for about a year now, just over a year. So we're going to be showing you how we can touch on MCPs and the private marketplace. So that's all going to come into security and flexibility. We're also going to be touching on controls for IT pros. So you may or may not have seen at GitHub Universe the announcement of GitHub Copilot metrics, which is quite cool. So you folks have been asking for this for so long, it's now finally coming. So it gives you great insights into your business, into the developers, how developers are using these tools, and how you can make better decisions thereon out. So we've got a really packed agenda. We're going to be talking through a lot of this with 𝗦𝗲𝗏𝗏𝗏, and we're going to have some fun. So managing Visual Studio Code at scale, what do we really mean by that? So I have been a developer in the past, and 𝗦𝗲𝗏𝗏𝗏,
I've been an assistant administrator.
Yeah, system administrator, right? So you and I never got on in a previous life.
No.
So before we were cloud advocates, we were always at each other's necks saying,
I like him now.
Yeah, we're good friends now. So what did we want? We wanted different things all at the same time. So as an IT pro, 𝗦𝗲𝗏𝗏𝗏 wanted the security. He wanted the organization and the developers to be secure. He wanted them to be compliant, and he wanted to have great control over what they were doing with their development environments. Now, I think I speak for a lot of IT pros when developers like myself come in and annoy you by saying, I want to get my job done really quickly and efficiently, and I want this lovely extension which makes my IDE look very pretty. But it's not necessarily the most secure, or may have vulnerabilities, or it could have problems with it. So 𝗦𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 wanted to keep the reins on somebody like myself. I wanted to fight back and get my job done quickly without those restrictions. We just simply wanted different things at the same time. So how do we combat this?
Well, I mean, these are very good points. And at the end of the day, it's a balance. And when we talk about Visual Studio Code, we are talking about a lot of different things that are there to enable you. But not only the developer, but also from the point of view of the sysadmin, of the IT pro that wants to leverage and make certain configurations within their organization. So you have the extension management pillar, where we're talking about how can we put some policies around and enable or disable or put things in an allow list or a deny list and enable that control so that we can, at the end of the day, help out developers, right? At the end, we want that constrained, but we also want to have developers be a little bit happier with their environment and give them the tools necessary to succeed. We do have a transparency layer here where VS Code is developing in the open. There's a transparency layer. You can actually see, you can go to the GitHub repository where Visual Studio Code is and look at the actual development. And you can track the issues. You can see anything that might be interesting to you. And aside from that, we have the policy and the governance. We're going to start seeing some of these things as we move forward. All right. So, but with that, with flexibility and openness, there are some challenges. We have the inevitability of security issues, right? So, because things are developing in the open, specifically in the extension marketplace, you know how many extensions are in the marketplace? We have 86,000 extensions for Visual Studio Code. That's a massive number. So it is very challenging to keep track of certain things like security issues when they come up and when they are present in the marketplace. In the past we've done a few things. Liam, why don't you walk us through some of the things that how Microsoft kind of like works behind the scenes to protect us in the marketplace?
Absolutely. So it's all good of us telling you that we are safe, secure, or compliant. We help you at all these different stages. But we could tell you until pigs fly, but that's never going to. We need to show you. You need to see it. So if you go to the Visual Studio Code documentation, you can see here marketplace protections. So we do malware scanning. Okay, so first and foremost, we're looking at the initial package of your extension or of the developer's extension to make sure that it's compliant and it's not got any malicious software or any malicious code in it. We're doing dynamic detection where we're verifying the runtime. So this is going to be run in a little sandbox, separate from everything else. It's going to be completely isolated so that it can't infect or can't affect anything else externally. We've got verified publishers, so we're looking at whether they have verified domain names. We're looking at whether they have a good track record, whether they're just good in general. And that's over sort of like a 6-month period where they can build up this reputation and be able to be published onto the marketplace. We're looking at unusual usage monitoring. So if there's any strange download behavior, if there's any odd behavior just in general around downloading or using these extensions in funny ways. So kind of like on that slide, there was an example there which was picked up pretty quickly, which was being used in a malicious way. We've got name squatting. Now I'm sure I'm not the only person to have seen this, but when people start using other characters in lieu of real characters, so maybe like a capital I for an L or a 1 as an I, and etc. So name squatting and trying to be somebody that they're not. We're looking at that. We've got a block list as well. So if anything has got a vulnerability in it, or if it has got anything which has been flagged by the community or by our systems, then we're blocking that and pulling it from the marketplace. We're also looking at signature verification. So much like containers where you have the SHAs, it's very similar to that, just making sure that it matches up with what is being published versus what is in the package. And then we've also got secret scanning as well. So we're not just protecting you as developers, we're protecting the extension creators as well to ensure that they are not publishing PAT tokens or API keys or any of these sensitive information into this extension, which exposes it to you as a developer for an organization. Because the last thing you will want is to have some big lawsuit come at you for something you don't even know about. So we're putting many, many layers in place within the Visual Studio Code team and the product to help you as developers stay secure, stay compliant with this at scale.
So there's a thing, however, like there's the Microsoft side of things where they're actively looking at things and extensions and doing the scanning. But you as an IT pro, as a sysadmin, might be like, you know what? That's good, but like I have private extensions, and my engineering group has developed these 2 or 3 private extensions. I want to roll them out. Where do I put them? Do I just like say, hey Liam, here you go. There's some private extensions, and he goes and installs them, and it's great. And then you start looking at the life cycle, and then suddenly he's developing something. It's like, oh, this doesn't work. Well, are you using 1.1 or 1.2? Do I need to send this again? Can you download these from the SharePoint or the OneDrive side? Like install it again, download it manually. It's just not manageable, right? It's a pain for him. It's going to be a pain for me, and so we're very excited to show you this new thing. Liam, why don't you drive us through this solution that we have for IT pros?
Absolutely. So before I do that, actually, a show of hands, who has heard of the private marketplace for the extensions? Okay, wonderful. There's only a couple of you. Brilliant. So I'm going to walk you through this video, and at the end, we're going to hop over again, and we're going to see something on my laptop as well. So to start with, private marketplace is this box that you can host, and you can have your own marketplace, which is tied to VS Code, and also use it as a proxy to the public marketplace. So as we can see in this video, we've got this API, which is a link to a marketplace or a hosted marketplace for us. And we can actually connect that to Visual Studio Code. You can see here on the service health, we've got privately hosted extensions, and we have got the public extensions available within this API. So if I go into VS Code, I'm going to sign in with my GitHub account, which this marketplace is tied to. So this is all very tightly coupled within the enterprise account. And it's going to prompt me then to restart Visual Studio Code, just to update some of the settings for me. Once we have relaunched VS Code, we can then see that we have got our privately hosted extensions available to us inside the VS Code marketplace. So Contoso Copilot, if you go and search for that on the public marketplace, it won't be there. You can see at the top, it's from the private extension. So this is from us. Not only that, but we have enabled for this API right now, marketplace upstream. So this is the public marketplace that we also have access to. So if I was to go and search for Copilot, I would also get all of the Copilot extensions associated within the marketplace. But you may be saying, hold on a minute, that's not very secure. How do I have even more control over that? So using group policies or local group policies, you can now determine from a top-down perspective which ones you want your developers to have access to from the public marketplace. So as we can see here, we're going to have, if I search for Copilot again, we can actually see some of them are grayed out. So we can only allow one of those three to be installed. So we're not only using this as a privately hosted marketplace, we're now using it as a proxy to the public marketplace, giving you more granular and fine-grained control over the developers.
So I think that's pretty cool. Being in charge, being at the head of like the control of like what you're allowing within your organization, what you are keeping back, what you're doing to enable your developers in your organization. Now, one of the features that I really like that was not in the video is that you can actually roll out updates when you push out these extensions. Your clients will automatically receive those new versions of the extension. So I think it's a pretty compelling service, and just happy to say that, by the way, this is GA today, or actually yesterday. Yep. But it's readily available. You can deploy it, you can use it, and I think it's a pretty cool way to manage extensions.
Yeah, and just touching on that final point there, Alfredo, you mentioned that you have access for versioning. So you can actually go into the documentation, you can go and check this out, but this is more, it was kind of very small at the end of that video, but the local policies there that you're able to edit looks a little bit like this. So you can see here, Visual Studio Code version greater than or equal to 1.96. We've enabled GitHub and the Microsoft extensions for the developers. You can add in the comments, etc., from a top-down perspective. So you've got great control over your developers. So I just wanted to mention that one at the end.
So now, in the same vein of like talking about this balance that must exist between system administrators, IT pros, and developers, let's go a little bit deeper into further balancing that. And I'm going to be talking about the Model Context Protocol, MCP. Now, anybody uses or has heard about MCP before? You know, as developers, awesome. if you've ever developed, like I think it's tremendous, right? And the idea here for those who have never used it before is that, you know, large language models in general, machine learning models, they have a cutoff date. You might have been able to see this when there's a new release of a model out there, of a large language model, and they say the cutoff date was this. What does that mean? Well, there's training data, and there's that training data was relevant up to a certain date, and then anything later is not there. So what that means in practice is that if I ask a large language model, what's the weather today in San Francisco, it will not know. There's no way. Now, knowing with double quotes, because you know that they don't really know. It's just like the data that it was trained on. So how can you enhance that, and how can you make it better? Well, that comes with the MCP protocol. Like in the past, when you wanted to extend AI tooling, like say for example, GitHub Copilot, and you say, well, I want GitHub Copilot to have capabilities. Let's continue with my silly example of the weather, and we'll say, yeah, sure, weather capabilities for GitHub Copilot. Well, you don't have access to that interface. There's no plugin system. There's no extensibility. The only way you could do that in the past was when you were building an actual AI application and you were enhancing your application to have what it is still called by some frameworks function calling. So you would write some code, and then the large language model will receive the input and would be like, oh, I think this person is actually asking about the weather. I'm going to like send that request to this function over here. It understands how to deal with these inputs, and it's going to provide me some context, which is kind of cool. And so the context will be pushed back to the large language model, and then it would say, totally, yeah, this is the weather for today in San Francisco, no problem. But the thing is that that wasn't possible to interface with something like GitHub Copilot, for example. So where we're at right now is that the MCP protocol, whenever tools expose that capabilities, it allows us to say, well, I want to have access to my database over here. I want to have access to my Azure environment. So you have all of these other tools, these MCP tools, that understand how to connect to these other services, to these other services that are providing data and enhance the response and interaction with the large language model. So that's what we have. That is what the Model Context Protocol is. How do we get these tools? Well, in the GitHub MCP registry, we have the capability to look for some of these tools. If you want to interact with Azure, your database, what database do you have? Are you using MySQL? Are you using PostgreSQL? And that is possible for developers when they're actually developing to look for those tooling, those MCP tools, to start enhancing what they're doing with the ability to get and retrieve that extra additional context that wouldn't otherwise be possible if it wasn't present, because again, the large language model is not necessarily going to know about your production environment or the logic in your database or the schema, unless you are copy pasting context, which, well, it ends up getting very tedious. All right, so we're going to talk about the internal MCP servers.
Yeah, so at Microsoft, it's great that we have this publicly available through Visual Studio Code and GitHub with this public registry, which is fantastic for external developers and people that want to use that. But let's say you're a business and you are making these internally. Where do you store them? Well, here at Microsoft, we're actually using Azure API Center Portal to do this. So we create them on the fly all the time. Maybe you've used APIM, so API Manager, before. You can actually create MCP servers through APIs that way. But we're actually using API Center, which is a great way for developers to securely internally deploy and develop MCP servers for us. So this is, again, very similar to the concept of using this private marketplace that we had for extensions, but internally here at Microsoft, what we're using for developers, they'll be creating this on a repository. They'll then request for that repository or that MCP server to be deployed into this portal for other internal folks to be using, or whoever in the team has access to this one. And once it's gone through the vetting and everything, we deem that it is compliant, it's serviceable, it does exactly what it says it's supposed to do on the tin, then it will be published to the registry. So for us to then use that, this is how we're doing this at Microsoft. And that's a little bit different to maybe how it's being used from a public domain with the GitHub MCP registry, like Alfredo was just talking over. So then this now brings us on to how do we bring that into a domain with GitHub and VS Code? Well, actually, in preview, we now have the enterprise-wide allow list. So let's say we were to publish that registry, and we have that URL for our team, and we wanted to then restrict the folks in the team as to whether they're using both internal or external MCP servers within their one environment. Again, we're going down the same vein or very similar approach to the extensions now, but now we're using this from within GitHub itself. So we're getting more granular control over MCP because, hey, even though extensions are also open source and open this gateway to security issues and compliancy, we are now moving into this direction of LLMs within with tools as well, which is MCP function calling. So what do we actually do with this? How do we do this? So I'm going to walk you through this video, And we're going to see exactly how we can manage this from a registry that we have then published. So we'll be going to GitHub Enterprise. So inside the GitHub Enterprise account, you go to your AI controls. Inside here, by default, VS Code is now pointing to the GitHub MCP registry. So without any URL, an MCP registry URL link box up there, without it, anything in there, by default, it's pointing to GitHub. But we can go ahead and change that. But first of all, let's go into VS Code, and we're going to check out exactly what we have access to, what we don't have access to. Now imagine this is one of your developers in your business, and they are just prodding and poking around and want to install these wonderful things, and you've got a lot of private information just hanging around and what they're developing. So let's just say we want to install one of these MCP servers. There we go, we've installed one. And it's readily available, as you can see on the left-hand side. Now, let's go back into GitHub and pop in a registry URL and save it. We're going to go back to VS Code, and then we're going to refresh it, just like we did before with the extensions, and we're allowing everything now. So we're allowing both public and private. So what we can see on the left-hand side now is we still have our public one available, but if we type in this box, MCP, and then maybe look at what else we have available, we have now got a whole list of other things available to us. So look at this email one, for example, MCP server for email. Let's go to the registry, just check out and see where that is. So we've installed the email. We can see that it is on the registry here. So we just search for that one with Control F. It's available. So we've installed it. So now we've got a public and a private registry installed, a public and private MCP server installed on our system. That's not good, is it? Because we may want to limit this. And how do we do that? Well, we have the registry only allow list. So this is basically whitelisting some of these MCP servers away from what we have. So there we are. On the left-hand side, we can see that the public one is no longer available to us. So we are now restricting developers. And the developers themselves will be like, hey, well, maybe I can go into my VS Code settings and change this. Well, no. We prevent that. So in the bottom right, in a minute, you can see here, if we change it from registry to everything, all of them, at the bottom right, you can see there's a policy infringement error, preventing the developer from enabling that. So now this is, again, a very top-down approach to controlling what your developers can and can't install, because these MCP servers are coming thick and fast. Extensions are still coming in thick and fast, and you need to stay compliant in this era of AI, right? We want to make sure that we have all the control that we have, and we want to make sure you are empowered to have the controls that you need to be able to do this and prevent your developers from just going AWOL. So much like 𝗦𝗲𝗀𝗲𝗀𝗲 would be hating on me as a developer, I would be the developer trying to go in and fudge these settings. Absolutely, I would try and go ahead and do that one. So we're really looking at the control here, the perspective of that one.
All right, so we've seen the marketplace. We've seen some of the controls that we can put in the marketplace for extensions. Then we've seen a similar set of controls for the MCP registry, which I think is pretty useful. You know, we're enabling, we're setting some allow and deny lists, we're proxying perhaps some of them for upstream enablement. That's great. But now let's move on to AI controls and what does that mean? And I want to focus right now on rolling out AI tooling like GitHub Copilot within your organization. What are some of the things that will actually work? But how can you actually tell, like if your organization is purchasing any number of licenses, like how can you tell, like is everyone using it? Is he using it like a little bit, a lot, maybe not enough? Maybe they used it once and they didn't anymore. What type of usage are we seeing in the organization? So, announced at GitHub Universe a few weeks ago, we have the metrics and dashboard from GitHub that allows you to have that deep insight into exactly what is going on through the usage. You will get this visibility into what's exactly going on. And you know, here I want to pause this thing about metrics and dashboard and what exactly is going on, and give you some sort of like a personal reference. I used to be an athlete. I did track and field, and my dad was my coach. And one of the things that we butted heads a lot was that he wanted me to write on a journal. Like every day I had to write on a journal. Well, I had to do this and at this time, and I even had to like control my weight, so I had to like write down my weight. Did I feel okay? Did I feel terrible? And then I didn't understand. I really didn't understand why every day he had me writing in this journal. In the end, well, I complied, and you know, I'm the athlete, so I have to like keep going. But fast forward like a year and a half after this constant argument, me and him, and then we're having a planning session for the next season. And so I asked, so what do you think, what are some of the changes that we should do? And he said, give me 1 second. And he goes to the small where he stored the books, and he grabs the journal and is like, let's take a look at last year's journal. And he looks at more or less roughly the same season. It's like, oh, well, we're doing these weights and we're doing this type of workout. And look at this, you were feeling great, and this is kind of like what I think we should follow, and maybe put it up more. And he had a phrase for that totally relates to what I'm trying to demonstrate here with the dashboard. He said, if you're keeping track of things, then you're able to compare. And only if you can compare, you can see if you're improving or not, right? Without understanding, without having those finer data points, it's just not possible. And we've seen organizations struggle sometimes with that lack of visibility and really not understanding where they are at with their rollout of GitHub Copilot, and if it's really good or not. So, based on what I just told you, you have the measuring usage and adoption. Like that's key. Like you understand if your users are actually using this or not, and how much they're using it. Then what's the output and outcome? So within the dashboard, you will see in a second, you have these finer data points that are telling you exactly how they're using the tool and how developers are being enabled, like per line, per token usage, are they using more the chat, or just like ghost text, which are the suggestions that are inline when they're typing code. And then, coincidence, maybe a little bit from the story I told you a little bit early, you have the ability to measure the results and the value. Then you can see, is this going well? Is my rollout going well? So, Liam, why don't you walk us through the dashboard and how does that look like?
Absolutely. So before I play this, who has seen the Copilot metrics dashboards already? Oh, wonderful. Only one of you. Brilliant. Okay, so the dashboard, like Alfredo says, is all about tracking. This is really, really important when it comes to GitHub Copilot. So in VS Code, you may have sort of looked over at the bottom left, or the bottom right, and you may have seen like the little icon and hovered over it, and you've seen like your token usage, or how many requests you're making, or how many you've got left, and so on and so forth. But now let's transpire this from an organizational perspective, because that's an individual that's working with that. If you're an organization, you need to understand how many of your developers are using it, how many are using requests or ask mode versus agent mode, how many of them are vibe coding their daily job, right? So this is a really good informational way to look at it. And I see a hand up there. We'll come to questions at the end. So what does it look like? How do we get into it? So inside your enterprise account, again, you'll want to go over to Insights. Hopefully you'll have been into Insights before on GitHub. This just shows you all the metrics that you have around certain accounts or a repository. Inside here, we can see Copilot usage. Now, this is a beautiful dashboard full of all the lovely colors that we love and breathe here. But you can see how many daily users there are, how many weekly users there are of GitHub Copilot. You can also see the average requests per active user. So who's really using this all the time and making the most out of the license? Who is making the most requests in agent mode versus ask mode? So you can really get an understanding of how your developers are working. You can see the code completion, so how well are the models actually working for you? Are they doing well? And then you can see the different languages as well. So I think that's important to see the different languages, because me as a developer is going to speak or work on a different language that Alfredo may do. So we're going to be seeing and comparing that within our teams. And this just really helps hammer home the perspective of where you can start to invest and where you can start making more strategic decisions with your development teams. So overall, this is just a really good way to visibly show what your developers are doing with GitHub Copilot within the IDE. Because, hey, lots of developers hide away on the weekend. I certainly do. I sit there and I vibe code. I love making little pet projects. But if I knew that there was something to show me how much I'm doing, I could maybe compare that to how much or how productive I really am versus how productive I used to be when I didn't use GitHub Copilot to help me vibe code these projects, right? So you can actually get a good bird's eye view and let's just say a 10,000 feet view of your developers and start making those strategic decisions. Not only that, as an admin of this, you can give read-only controls to your team. So you can look at your managers and say, hey, you can have read-only to this dashboard. You can go and see what your team are doing. You can understand and get more granular control. And you can download the metrics into JSON format as well. And you can pull that out and then utilize that, take snapshots as you wish. And then you can just see the sort of transpiration of what you're doing with these developers and what you're using GitHub Copilot for throughout a period of time. So it's a really, really useful way for you to get that view on your devs.
You know, I really wanted to be a designer at some point. I created this slide. It doesn't have any colors, nothing flashy. This is on purpose. If anything, for your IT strategy, for your AI strategy in your organization, I want you to remember these three things that we've experienced in the field when we're talking with customers and we're going and talking with engineers and we're talking with IT pros and we're looking at their strategy and what works and what doesn't work. So one of the things that we've done is, well, we've provided training. Sometimes we go and do some demos. But I can't scale. I cannot clone Liam. I wish I could clone you. Oh, I like this guy so much. I wish I could clone you, but it's not possible, right? We cannot provide training or training resources and be able to have meaningful ad hoc training for everyone out there. So do you know how you can tell if an engineer is not very happy? They'll tell you about it.
Yep. We will.
Yeah, he gets very cranky sometimes. He tells me. So in essence, that communication is crucial. So to understand what are the needs and what are the complaints and what are some of the problems. Sometimes organizations have controls in place for license activation. And sometimes when there's too much friction, and developers say like, I don't know. I don't understand the process. I'm just not going to use it. But because there's a communication breach, there's no constant feedback loop, then that might get lost. And so that's essential. And then the other one, kind of like hand in hand with that, is if you have communication policies or strategy in place, and you're able to talk and discuss these things with your engineers, and you're getting useful feedback. Well, one of the things that I wanted to touch on is the ability of naming champions within your organization. And champions are nothing other than leads within their own smaller groups or own smaller teams. And they have like this first-hand access to tools like GitHub Copilot. And they can say, well, I really like this. Let me see how can I apply it in my smaller team with a narrower focus. So say, for example, if I'm more on the back end and Liam is doing more things on the front end, then perhaps the things and the tips and tricks and things that I can suggest for the back end are not necessarily going to apply to him if he's doing things on the front end. He might be using other MCP tooling, for example, Playwright, which is pretty awesome, that you can develop websites and interact with that, with GitHub Copilot with that and building websites, which is pretty cool. That wouldn't necessarily apply. So being able to have these champions be a multiplier voice and allow you to scale throughout, it will allow you to also get better feedback, because within their own group, they will be able to hear more accurate, more constant feedback from developers that are trying this AI tooling. So having said that, it's not only enough to just like, okay, so I did this, there's a strategy. We have like a weekly office hours to answer questions, and then we name some champions. Well, wait a second. It's not like a said and done. You press a switch, it's good to go. You have to have like some sort of like a constant loop. And then, of course, every now and then, more often actually than sometimes I know about, we get new features out. Sometimes I've done demos about GitHub Copilot, and I'm like, they changed the button, and now it's in a different place. And I'm like, whoa, how do I turn this thing on? Because we roll features very often. And sometimes these features will enable or fix problems or enable developers to be even more productive. And you want to stay on top of those, and scaling through champions and this feedback loop is, well, essential. So hopefully you stay with these things, these strategies that you can implement coming Monday, and when you're rolling out GitHub Copilot, along with the dashboard to keep track of metrics and seeing what's going on within your organization.
So I think if we remember back to that first slide between IT pros and devs, I think Alfredo and I can now become friends, and I think that we're starting to put these processes in, we're starting to put these systems in. It's never going to be a linear process. It's never going to be straight down the middle with developers and sysadmins or IT pros, but we believe that we're starting to add these processes and features and tooling to help each and every one of them be very happy in your job. So with that, I want to say a massive thank you for coming. Hopefully you enjoyed some of these features that we're showing you, and there are plenty more to enjoy throughout the rest of this conference. So if you want to get hands-on, or say hands-on, you want to get a deep dive on private marketplace, you can go to Theatre Session 750. That is, I think, in Moscone West, floor 3, Theatre F, if I recall correctly. We've got Breakout 105 and Breakout 115. And of course, if you want some of the links to some of the resources, there's a fantastic blog there at the top, so aka.ms/VS-Code/private marketplace blog. So give that a read. That is fantastic. Got lots of useful information around the private marketplace and actually how it works and how it's secured for you. Now, Alfredo and I work very hard to put these sessions together, and we want to always improve on what we're doing. So if you have any feedback for us, we'd really appreciate this.
We accept complaints.
You want complaints?
Yes.
Complaints. I call it constructive feedback. So if you want to tell us how you thought the session was, anything that you'd like to see in the future, anything you want to see more of, then please do let us know. We can't improve without your feedback. We can't guess and cherry pick what we think you want without you actually telling us what you want.
Thank you so much for being here. We have a few minutes for questions. We would love to hear you out. We have a microphone provided by Microsoft. If you want to ask us any questions, we're happy to spend a few more minutes. And the microphone is right here. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Ooh, is the microphone on? Oh. Oh.
Go ahead. We'll repeat the question. Go ahead.
Yep.
For the extension allow, deny, I noticed some policies. Is there any plan to do that into any policies, or should people just use a custom CSP?
Yeah, so the question was if the group policies will eventually move to Intune, and right now that's not a planned feature, maybe perhaps in the future, but there's also a very deep dive on this with one of the actual developers of the private marketplace that is coming up.
Yep, that's the theater session. Super.
Add-on question to that, what about non-Windows platforms like VS Code is available for Mac?
Absolutely, great question.
Yes, there is.
Yes.
But we didn't have examples for those today, but yes, it is possible. Highly suggest you go to the next session that is deep dive into that, and it has examples of specifically for the Mac as well.
I'd also like to call out the documentation. So where I got that screenshot from on the documentation, if you go to the VS Code docs, it is in there as well, everything that's supported and how you can enable that. Super, thank you.
Is there any integration coming with Purview? Like VS Code and Purview to make sure people aren't like pushing stuff to a repo that maybe like sensitive source code or like things like that?
I'm not sure.
I am not sure.
I do not know the answer to that one.
Like I know it does API secrets automatically, like GitHub scans for those.
Yes.
But what about like, more like proprietary code or something like that, something that you don't want pushed to a public repo, but some dev just accidentally did that, you know what I mean?
I mean, that's a very good question. So one of the things that Visual Studio Code has is that it's developed in the open. So you can actually take a look at some of the features in there, and because they use the issue tracker.
Right.
So you might do that. Also, you could create a feature request and say, hey, this is something that I need for my organization. We would like to have purview with Visual Studio Code and explain the example scenario that you have. And I think that would be wonderful. Issues are looked by engineers and product owners of the Visual Studio Code team. So highly encourage you to do that.
Constantly looked at.
Great session, by the way.
Thank you.